Okay. Let's begin by speaking a little bit about this ignorance and delusion called avidya.
Are cineva nevoie de traducere? Înțelegeți engleză.
Don't you think it would be better if you sat next to me?
I'm just asking them if they need translation.
Oh, okay. And they don't need? No one?
If
no
you
one?
need, you tell me.
Okay. Good. Okay. In the Buddhist teachings in general, we have this contrast between Rigpa and Marigpa, or Vidya and and Avidya. And at this Avidya or Marigpa, there are three types in the Dzogchen teaching. The first one is the ignorance of our true condition, which is the true condition of all phenomena, due to a factor of stupefaction, that has gone along with the mental stream of sentient beings since time without beginning. This is the first time, so that is ignorance. The second type is already not ignorance but delusion, and it is the subject-object duality, to experience whatever manifests through the senses as being part of an external dimension. And the third type of avidya is the experience of whatever we single out in the field of the object, to experience it as being in itself separate and as being in itself this or that. For example, a video camera, a computer, etc. And according to the Eastern theory of human evolution, which is degenerative, this avidya has been increasing as time passes, as time goes on. And this is not only Eastern. In the Greco-Roman civilization and also in Persia they had it, this vision. For example, in Greece, the Cynics and the Stoics shared that vision, that there was a golden age at the beginning. In Buddhism it's called an age of perfection. Kritya Yuga, in Tibetan thought then, and in some Dzogchen texts, is called Sokpa Chempoi Dempa, which means the era or age of Dzogchen. Like people had free access to the condition of Dzogchen, which is our primordial true condition. And then as this delusion increases, there are 3 or 4 eras according to how we divide it. And so, for example, in the threefold division, we have era of truth, age of dharma, and then black era. And in the fourfold, we have this first age of perfection or age of Dzogchen, then age of 3, age of 2, and Kali Yuga, dark age or black age. Then we think that this is very strange because we are so used to this normal theory of this modern view of evolution, that everything is improving, that there is progress, that this seems really weird to us, absurd even. We have this idea that cavemen, like troglodytes, the men, if there was some food, they would beat each other on the head, and then whoever was stronger would get the food, and if there was a woman, they would beat her with a club on the head and drag her to the cave, and so on. And this research in the last 3 decades has shown this to be absolutely untrue, and not only untrue but quite inverted. So there is, for example, paleopathology. It is the study of the human remains of the most ancient ages, and before 4,000, 4,500, before the Christian era, we don't find human remains that have died from violence by other human beings. Some people have some arrow or something, but the proportion is the proportion that would be expected from hunting accidents. There was certainly no mass violence, and there seems to have been even no individual violence. Only in some places in the Nile Valley, around Kenya, today Kenya, and in some places in Australia, violence and even mass violence begins in 12,000 before the Christian era. But those are the only two places where we find this. And about women, there seems to be a total equality of status. Of course, there was a differentiation of labor. The women tend to do one type of work and the men another one. But for both of them, it was play. Yeah? The work they did was play. It was like hunting and fishing and recollecting, which nowadays are hobbies, things many people like to do on the weekends when they are not working. And there is another science, which is ethnoecology, which is the study of the relationship between ethnias and their milieu. And for example, there is this guy, Philippe Decola, who was a French ethnologist. He went to live with the Achuar in Ecuador, in the jungle, in the Amazon, and he observed that the places that they inhabited had more biodiversity than the places that were not inhabited. So he brought a lot of people from the Centre National pour la Recherche Scientifique from France, and they made a very intensive study, research, and they found out that throughout the Amazon, the places that have the greatest biodiversity are the places that have been inhabited for a longer time. And Trophy Burger, this American company, they bought big pieces of Amazon and they cut everything to grow grass for growing cattle for their hamburgers. And that became, it was Sahelized, it began becoming desert, and it became like desert after just, I don't remember exactly how long, but not a long time. So the biodiversity of the Amazon is not due to the fertility of the soil, but quite the contrary, is produced by human beings. And Philippe Decola concluded that Amazonian Indians, just like North American Indians, for them, nature was a human construction. Nature has been produced by human intervention. And instead, there is a book by Tom Dale and Vernon Gill Carter, which is called Topsoil and Civilization. And in that book, they show that nearly all the big civilizations of this planet have destroyed themselves due to the bad relationship they have with the rest of the ecosystem. And nowadays, we have created an ecological crisis that is threatening our very survival and creating a lot of discomfort for human beings, and that could even possibly destroy human civilization in the course of this century. So, as we see, these savages were quite wise, and we are quite ignorant and deluded. This avidya, this maripa, has been increasing, and we seem to have far more avidya or marikpa than whoever came before us, our ancestors and primal peoples and so on. Of course, these primal peoples, so-called primal peoples, as André Leroy-Gourand and Annette Lehmann-Perea, and also Theodore Rosak, they showed that, they showed, we could say, that these primal peoples of today are not just like the people, like our ancestors from from millennia ago, but that they have already degenerated to some extent, but in a very different way from the one in which we have degenerated and far less. So that, for example, in the Amazon, in Venezuelan Amazon, the Yanomamis, even though they improve their environment and they don't punish their children, and they have some virtue, they wage war with other groups from the same ethnia, yeah. So that involves some degeneration, but not like ours. You go today to Syria and the amount of death you find, it's not comparable to the, they wage a war which is limited. Like I kill 2 or 3 of the other group, and then they come and kill 2 or 3 of my group, and like that, but there is not, they don't seek to exterminate each other, to wipe the other group, to wipe it out. So, there are many other proofs of this also, or hints of this. There was this man who was an Indian registrator in what today is the US, and he observed that the Indians who had to queue in order to register for the reservation that the English instituted, I don't know if it was probably the English already, and then the Americans, they would be queuing all day, and when we are queuing, we are like very restless, And these Indians, they were just like that, and they wouldn't talk. And every once in a while they would exchange some words with another Indian, and they didn't have this restlessness which is proper to civilized people, in particular people of our age. Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher and physicist and mathematician, he had this idea that boredom was that which moved humankind. But of course he was speaking about modern humankind, modern humans, who cannot stay without doing anything. But let's stop that because we are concerned with aesthetics. So we have to begin with how do values arise. Okay, so how do values arise? It seems from all that we were saying that in this primal era, in this primordial era, the Kritya Yuga, the Sopa Chempoi Dempa, or Age of Truth, Satya Yuga, people showed the virtues, just as with reading the Tao Te Ching, where it says at the beginning the Tao prevailed. When the Tao was lost, then its virtue remained. Just like when we have a mothball, naphthalene, in a drawer, and we remove it, but still there is the smell of the naphthalene. So people tended to behave naturally in a wholesome way. Then when the virtue of the Tao is lost, then we have goodness. When goodness is lost, then we have justice. When justice is lost, we have rituals of justice, which are not justice. And like that, yeah, like everything is degenerating. So what we regard as values are like the qualities of the primordial era. When we have lost those qualities, then we begin to view them as virtues. And then we try to, we are told that we should be virtuous, but then we are like fighting against our tendencies, and also because that implies that we are not virtuous, then we can never achieve perfect virtue. So the more we try to achieve virtue, the more unvirtuous we become. So this is a little bit this idea. So in Greece we had this idea also. It's implicit in some of the most ancient traditions, and the Pythagoreans and Plato also. I am not their fan because they come from the Orphic tradition. They produce their philosophy on the basis of the Orphic mysteries, which were dualistic and not at all wholesome, according to my view, but we don't have time to get into that either. Anyhow, they receive some of the old traditions and they turn them, they modify them according to their dualistic vision. And the Pythagoreans spoke about the kalokagasia, and that is the indivisibility of of beauty and truth. And Plato spoke of the inseparability or indivisibility of truth, goodness, or good and beauty. All that we regard as virtues, they thought they asserted it to be indivisible, and they were indivisible in the primordial condition because they were inherent in the Tao that prevailed at that time. So this is quite, it follows from this vision somehow. And however, of course, as I said, these Pythagoreans and Plato, they had this dualistic vision according to which the body was evil and the soul was good, and the soul got corrupted when it got into the body, and therefore it had to be purified from this contamination from the body, and it had to be purified according to the Orphics by the mysteries, and according to the Pythagoreans by the contemplation of mathematics, because mathematics were not corporeal, and the corporeal reality was that which corrupted according to them, and music because it was also not corporeal, and it was harmony. So it was the way to recover this primal harmony somehow. Okay, so what is beauty then? In this view, beauty is not necessarily a perfect harmony in a shape, nor is it, as the British empiricists believe, utility, usefulness, nor was it, as, for example, Kant believed, agreement with some a prioris in the faculty of judgment, but it was simply that which occurs when our perception is totally open. William Blake, in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, wrote, when the doors of perception are open, everything appears in its perfect, in its wonder. It's not exactly like that, but more or less. Infinite, and I don't remember the other.
appears as it truly is, eternal or infinite. Yeah.
Infinite and something else, yeah. Okay. And then in this perception, I mean, our idea of beauty is like the memory of that perception. So I want to talk about what I call visionary art, but let's go a little bit more before into the different aesthetic theories that arose during the modern times. And many painters, and also René Descartes, but that idea, it might have come already from the Greeks, who had the idea of this golden proportion. Yeah, they said that beauty was the harmony of a shape, of a form, that this form had to be in agreement with certain proportions, and then it would be beautiful. That was this idea that prevailed. The English, or the British rather, empiricists, they believed that beauty had to do with utility or usefulness. And then Kant produced this, what has been called the Copernican revolution, that he made beauty reside in the faculty of judgment. That is, not in the forms, but on whether or not the forms were in agreement with some a priori in the faculty of judgment. And then, if they were in agreement with that, they would be beautiful. But that would imply that beauty would be always the same. And this has been shown very easily not to be the case. For example, Europeans were absolutely unable to appreciate Chinese painting. The first Chinese painting that came to Europe came as wrapping for porcelain. And then some painters discovered them, and then they began to appreciate them, and that was one of the elements that triggered the Impressionist revolution. But we will come to that later on, yeah? I mean revolution in art, not political revolution. Yeah. Anyhow, this Kant's idea was that beauty depended on conformity to an end of an object that the faculty of judgment determines on the basis of an a priori, something that is not really that is inborn, but doesn't come from experience. But it develops as experience develops, but doesn't depend on experience. And requiring reflection and necessarily producing pleasure, and making us think that the object necessarily must produce pleasure for all other human beings. So, this is a very, whatever I feel is beautiful, I don't want to be just to think that it's beautiful for me because of my whims, and it's not beautiful to other people, yeah? I want to believe that it is in itself inherently beautiful. And therefore it must be beautiful for everyone, because there is something called beauty that exists in itself. And that, of course, is wrong, because of what we said, yeah? These people, European people in general, were not able to appreciate Chinese art, and these people who carried out the Impressionist revolution, they were inspired by this because they began to appreciate it. And when they themselves began to do their Impressionist paintings, they were not accepted in the Saloon of Paris. And therefore they had to create this Salon des Refusés, the Saloon of the Rejected. And people began to go there, and after some time, people began to want to. They learned to appreciate that art, and they experienced intense wonder in front of that art. And nowadays we have this Musée d'Orsay on the Seine River, which is one of the most valued museums in the world, with many of the paintings of these impressionists. Okay. So, what I want to talk is visionary art. Visionary art is related to primordial, what I call primordial aesthetics. And it's aesthetics of what is primordial, of this beauty that is not really beauty, but is the way of perceiving reality when one is in the state of Dzogchen, in the state of total perfection, total plenitude and perfection. And whatever can give us a glimpse of that state, or maybe not a glimpse of the state itself, but a glimpse of something that is on the way to that state of Dzogchen. We will speak a little bit about what I call what the Dzogchen teaching called Kunji, but this maybe if people are not Dzogchen students, it may be a little bit bizarre to speak about that, but we'll see. Anyhow, what I call visionary art, and I didn't invent the word, it has been used by many people and is currently used by many people. In particular, Aldous Huxley made it very popular, that term, visionary art. And he used it in this sense in which I am using it here, is the type of art that induces what I call the aesthetic epoché. What is this? Epoché is a Greek term that was used by Pyrrho of Elis. Pyrrho of Elis was this philosopher from the town of Elis, and in his youth he met Anaxarcho of Abdera, and Anaxarcho of Abdera transmitted to him many doctrines that were transmitted to him by Democritus of Abdera in turn. And Democritus of Abdera, according to some historians, had been in India, and he had met the earliest Buddhists, and he had carried to Greece some of these Buddhist doctrines, including the idea of parinama, what in Sanskrit is called parinama, and we translate as atoms. That's why he is the first atomist in Greek philosophy. But this is not important. He is supposed to have transmitted the method of isosthenia, actually more isosthenia, which is the use of opposites in order to lead the interlocutor beyond the idea that something is true and something is false, beyond grasping at something true or something false, and therefore beyond judgment, and reach a state which is somehow alike to the state that Buddhists are trying to attain, and actually do attain when the practice is successful. This method of isosthenia, actually it's a Z, not a ten, but it's difficult to pronounce, is being used very much in Buddhism. It was used a lot, well, Madhyamaka philosophy is based on that method, and in Zen Buddhism it was very much used. For example, Huihai, Tachu Huihai, he wrote a book, and in that book he said an imaginary dialogue, and he said, what is the middle way? And he himself replied, the opposite. The extremes, the extremes. How can that be? I mean, he's trying to break our grasping at the concept. And there is an even more interesting example. A master of the Tripitaka, I mean someone who had mastered the 3 baskets of Buddhist learning, came to him because he wanted to ridicule this stupid Zen master who doesn't know anything about Buddhism, and they pretend to be leading people to enlightenment. And he went and said, I'm going to confuse him, and showed in front of everyone that he doesn't know anything about Buddhism. Then he said, do changes, Venerable Master, do changes occur in the Bhuta-tata, in the absolute nature? And then, of course, the answer that he judged correct was that no changes occurred, because in the absolute there are no 2 things to be compared, and therefore changes cannot occur. Then Huihai, he knew that this was the answer that he expected, and then he said, yes, they do occur. And then the other one very proudly said, oh, Venerable Master, don't you know that in the absolute no changes can occur? And then he said, yes. Haven't you heard? Then you must be a very ignorant type of monk, a very ignorant kind of monk. Haven't you heard that a wise monk can turn the 5 poisons into the 5 wisdoms, and the 3 poisons into the 3 accumulative virtues? Oh yes. Then you must be absolutely unable to do that, because that's a change, and you are the Bhuta-tata, that is your true condition. So if you cannot do that, that means that you are a really ignorant type of monk. Well, Master, if you put it that way, then of course changes do occur in the Bhuta-tata. And yet when you say that, you are equally deluded, because he who is like a mani pearl, who reflects all appearances without any of them being stuck to it, can equally say that changes do occur in the Bhuta-tata, or that changes do not occur. But someone who grasps at concept will always be wrong. So he actually, yeah. And this is very much used not just to defeat an argument, but in order to lead someone to awakening. It's a method of Madhyamaka philosophy. Okay, so Epoché is translated as suspension of judgment, and it could be also suspension of conceptualization. But here we are speaking about the aesthetic Epoché, not the suspension of an intellectual judgment about something or of a concept, but of what Kant called aesthetic judgment. Yes? So, a particular vision can put me in a state where I cannot put that vision into a aesthetic judgment, and I cannot say, oh how beautiful, or oh how ugly, and I am in wonder. Of course, this wonder is not awakening, it's not Rigpa, as the Dzogchen teachings say. It is a state that the Dzogchen teaching called Kunji, in which there is no subject of the real Kunji, there is not even subject-object duality, and certainly there are no thoughts. But Rigpa is not manifest, because the first type of Marikpa, of avidya, this ignorance of the true condition due to a factor of a stupefaction, because you see, we are in wonder. We are like a stupefact before this shape, this form. So this is not exactly Rigpa, but it's somehow on the way to Rigpa, and it can be a doorway to Rigpa. So, in that state, we could think that this could be somehow similar to that which the philosopher of aesthetics would call the sublime, which Kant explained a little bit different from his predecessors also. But in a way, the more general idea was, for example, that the tempest could be beautiful but dreadful. And so that would be the sublime a little bit for most philosophers. But it's not exactly the same, because in the sublime, still you have this wonder and this feeling, but you have a little bit of nearly like fear, like you are overwhelmed or something like that. The right word is not coming to me right at this moment. And this is a little different, yeah? But anyhow, what I call visionary art, following many other people who use the word before me, is the type of art that produces this or induces this aesthetic epoche. And therefore it leaves you in this state which somehow gives you a pre-taste of awakening, even though it's not awakening. It gives you some idea of how to go beyond the separation between good and bad, beautiful and ugly, and all of that could be. As Aldous Huxley noted, visionary art is not an art of beauty, conceived in any of these ways, but a condition similar to that which Plato called the other world. What is this other world of Plato? That was actually what Plato called the other world, is what other philosophers of the tradition of those who have come from Buddhism, like Pyrrho and Democritus and Anaxarchus and so on, and also like Heraclitus of Ephesus, would share, and which was related to Buddhism and also to the Dionysian tradition, whereas the Orphics were related to Apollo, the idea of a beauty that resided in harmony somehow, which was very much the idea that these pre-Kantian European philosophers in the modern times had. And then Plato projected that in another world, which was the world of Eidos, the world of that which was translated as ideas, but which are not ideas because they don't reside in the mind. They reside in another dimension which is totally immaterial, totally lacks materiality. Yeah? It's just shapes without materiality, according to Plato. So it has very much to do with this dualistic vision that Plato had, that the material world was bad and the ideal world was good. And actually, Plato's idea was more complicated because he combined the ideas of the Pythagoreans with those of the Eleatians, but this is a little bit complicated to explain. Yeah? Anyhow, he combined these two systems, and he said that our problem is that matter, which is non-being and therefore non-good, non-truth, and non-beauty, is part of this material reality, but it also shares, or either shares or imitates. He has these two different theories and different dialogues, this reality of Eidos. Therefore, it's neither, because non-good is bad, according to the Greeks, non-beauty is ugliness, non-truth is falsehood, and so on. So this, the idea was that matter was bad and untrue and bad or evil, and that the idols were good and true and etc. And that this reality was neither one nor the other, was midway. And therefore, when souls reincarnated, it was not the materiality of the body that contaminated them, but what contaminated them was perception of this half and half reality. And the artists, because they imitated this half and half reality, they were corrupters of the people, and they had to be expelled from the ideal republic that he fancied somehow. Yeah, we should not get too much into that, yeah? Anyhow, the way Plato describes that reality is very much how we experience reality in the primordial age, or how reality manifests to someone who is enlightened or someone who is in the state of Rigpa. And in Phaedo, this dialogue by Plato, and this is quoted by Aldous Huxley in this book called Heaven and Hell, where he is actually speaking about the psychedelic experience, which is not what we are trying to achieve in Buddhism, and actually that's something that is part of another subject, which is, this is what I call, I have spoken about the difference between psychedelics and Buddhism in a series of 4 books which are called the Beyond Mind Papers, and in many lectures in different places of the world, and trying to distinguish one thing from the other and showing that they are not the same. But anyhow, that's another subject which we are not concerned with. For Huxley, it seems to be the psychedelics could take you to enlightenment. And then he says, quoting the Phaedo by Plato, the colors in that other world, the colors are much purer and much more brilliant than they are down here. The very certain mountains, the very stones have a richer gloss, a lovelier transparency and intensity of hue. The precious stones of this lower world, our highly prized cornelians, jaspers, emeralds, and all the rest, are but the tiny fragments of these stones above. In the other earth there is no stone, but is precious and exceeds in beauty every gem of ours. Yeah, but according to Plato, that was in another world. And in the vision, this degenerative vision, this is how we perceive this reality, this world, when the doors of perception are not closed by the filter through which we experience in everyday reality. The filters of concepts, judgments, and ideas. Yeah, but we are totally open, and we are in this experience of pure sensation. And this is the way how a Buddha, if we could call the experience of a Buddha, if we could call it experience, then we could say that would be the way a Buddha experiences. Yeah. As we said before, this epoché, the epoché, leads not really to awakening, but more rather to this state of kunji. But of course, what Plato was describing is very much like how we experience everything in Rigpa, yeah, as it truly is, without these filters that distort perception, and which are part of this Marigpa or avidya. Okay. In Eastern sacred art, Ananda Kumaraswamy theorist from Sri Lanka, he said that in this sacred art of the East, there is an indivisibility of denotation and connotation. That means that the art and that which the art expresses or refers to or denotes are not different. And that means a little bit like the symbol is not pointing to something totally different from itself, but the symbol is itself the thing. That goes a little beyond the Kumaraswami's idea, but if we bring his idea to the extreme, we could come to that conclusion. And that is precisely the way Tibetan Lama Chogyal Namkhen Orbu explains Mahamudra. He says that Mahamudra in Tibetan, Chakchen, this Chak doesn't mean seal, as many translators claim. That these translators are reading the Tibetan words wrongly, that actually that word means symbol. The way this Chak is written means symbol. And Chen means great, but in this case great could be greater or less great. Yeah. So it's better to say total. The total is absolute. So Mahamudra, according to Chogyal Namkhen Orbu, means total symbol. That is, everything we experience is symbol, and it's not a symbol that points to something else that is concrete and not a symbol, but everything is symbol that doesn't point to anything concrete. And this is the experience of the realization of Mahamudra, as explained by Chogyal Namkhen Orbu. And we will explain this in terms of the mandala in just after a moment. Anyhow, in this degenerative aesthetic theory that I am trying to present here, we could use Eurasian art as a model. So let's begin with Europe and then we move to Asia. I say Eurasian because nothing separates Europe from Asia except the mind of the Europeans. That they feel different from the Asians, so they invented a separation where there is none, and they invented that Europe is one continent even though there is no separation between Europe and Asia. It's the same continent. Yeah? A continent should be like a big island. Yeah? And the big island will be Eurasia. And even before, it was communicated with Africa until they built the Suez Channel. So it could be even more complicated. Yeah, well, we could say a continent, Eurasia. Okay, in Europe, we could explain a little bit how we went from the realist of Greek art to visionary Christian art. But first of all, I would like to say a quotation from Gregory Bateson. There is a law in economics, in economic theory, which is called the Gresham law. And this Gresham law is that whenever you have a good coin and a bad coin, the bad coin would displace the good coin. Let me give an example. If a country coins silver coins and also coins nickel coins, then everyone will begin to try to collect the silver coins because they are aware that silver in itself has exchange value. But nickel, if there is a devaluation, the nickel cannot be sold for much until the devaluation is very extreme. In Venezuela, they are melting the coins for the nickel. Now, people, yeah. And in Colombia, they buy the Venezuelan paper money because they can print dollars on it, yeah, because it's paper money. So if they print dollars, they can buy, for 1 cent of a dollar, they can buy many, many, many bills, and they can make maybe $50 bills, and they make a lot of money. So this Gresham law is that the bad coin displaces the good coin. And this is how Gregory Bateson illustrates this degenerative evolution of humankind, even though he never explained this theory or related it to these Eastern theories or to the Greek theories and so on. So this Greek art, of course, there is value in Greek art, but it was very realistic. It was not so visionary. Greek sculpture and Greek painting was not so visionary. Then suddenly, after Christianity came to prevail in Europe, then this type of art that has no depth, is like bidimensional, displays the Greek art which had perspective. The Greek art, for example, in Greek paint, there was perspective, just as in the European art of 1600 or 1700 of the Christian era.
Renaissance.
Huh?
The Renaissance.
Yeah, for
They started
example.
use the perspective again.
Exactly. From the Renaissance onward, yeah, it began to have perspective. Before that, it was flat. When I was a child and I was brought to museums, I assumed somehow that it was because they didn't know how to represent perspective, because they were not so developed. I was influenced by the idea of progress that had been put into me since I was a child. And then afterwards I realized that these paintings are incredible, that they really change your mind. They bring you into another dimension of experience. And why? Because you expect everything to have perspective. And when you face one of these paintings, something happens in your mind. If you go to the Prado Museum in Madrid, there are many paintings because the Spanish Renaissance came much later than in the rest of Europe. Even, assuming we could speak of a Spanish Renaissance, which some people would deny or negate. And if you stand before any of these paintings, you could have this experience in which your sensation of space, time, and perception instantly changes. Very
speaking
much.
about the flat ones?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. A little bit similar, though less strong, than what happened with Tibetan art. There used to be a museum in Bhaktapur, Tanka Museum. And I went there when I had just come to Nepal. I was theoretically a Buddhist, but I hadn't been studying Buddhism with any master at the time. I had just come to Nepal, and I went there as a tourist. And I came there with my wife of the time and my son to this museum, and there were many mandalas, tanka of mandalas, representing mandalas, and I would stand in front of each of these mandalas, and suddenly what I refer to about these pre-Renaissance paintings in Spain happened much more strongly. I would stand there and suddenly pop! And that was totally, really, this was like at the hippie times, hippies would say, it blows your mind. Yeah, my mind would be blown, literally. It was very much that, the expression agrees very much to what the experience was. Yeah. Okay. But we are still speaking about European art. Then there came this Renaissance, and the art of Renaissance, which was more realistic and had perspective and so on. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, also this Russian religious art, they have the same feeling. And there is a picture, a combination of a photograph and painting of the Dalai Lama, which also has this, yeah, it has no perspective. So when you see this picture, it changes your perception. Anyhow, with the Renaissance, this changed, and you got perspective in art, but still there were some things that were incredible, like sometimes it was the gaze of the figure represented, or the smile, a little bit like Gioconda, the Gioconda by Leonardo has a little bit of that, and there are quite a bit there is in the Louvre a painting of a Jesus with some gaze and the whole of the expression, which is absolutely, I mean, it's like an enlightened being, really. Whenever I go to the Louvre and seen that painting, I had to stare at it for a long time because it's really incredible. And it can be found in the internet also.
The painter?
I think maybe they don't know who is the painter. I'm not sure. Yeah, I could find it for you maybe later on. Okay, and then came well, there were many other stages, like romantic art and so on, but the first really big change that happened afterward was the Impressionist, what I call the Impressionist revolution, because it's really like a turning around of things complete. And again, we get something that has a very strong visionary power. And Aldous Huxley also in this book, in Heaven and Hell, he gives the example of some of these water lilies by Monet. Monet lived in this place on the east of Paris, where there were many ponds with lilies, and he painted many paintings of water lilies, and they really do away with all the rules of composition that are established in Western aesthetics, totally. And Aldous Huxley comments a conversation he had with an art critic whose name I don't remember right now, and they were saying, oh, it breaks so totally the rules of composition, and yet it's so wonderful. And like that, in the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist, Van Gogh, for example, absolutely incredible, yes. And probably had to do with the fact that he had this perception, which he was going through a process of derealization. And derealization, he felt lost of the false reality that the whole of the members of a society share, but which is totally deluded, and is that which we have to go beyond. There is this saying in Zen Buddhism also, by a Zen master. Before I studied Zen, for me the mountains were simply mountains, and the rivers were simply rivers. When I began to strongly study Zen and began to have some effects, for me the mountains were no longer mountains and the rivers were no longer rivers. He was having glimpses of Shunyata. Yeah? He was undergoing a derealization of the false reality. Then, when I got to the truth of them, then for me, the mountains became truly mountains, or true mountains, and the river became true rivers. That means I was no longer seeing them through the concepts learned, but I was seeing them in their thusness, in their thatness, in their ta-ta-ta, in their true condition. So I would see them as mountains, but I would see them as the mountain truly is, and I would see the river as the river truly is, in its nakedness, its true condition. So if we don't derealize the true reality, the false reality, as Ronald Lang used to say, we cannot realize the true reality. And Van Gogh would have been diagnosed probably as a schizophrenic. At the time the level didn't exist, but some psychiatrists have said he was schizophrenic, others give him other labels. I don't believe in such labels, but it doesn't matter. He was very confused because he didn't understand what was going on, and at the end we know how he ended. Yeah, not a nice end at all. And also, he was even so disturbed that he got his ear and sent it to Gauguin, who was in the South Pacific. But his paintings are so vast, so powerful, and in many of the Impressionists we have this. And then things began they continue to happen, yeah, changes, different movements, and then we have Expressionism, and we have Abstractionism, and we have Cubism, and we have this, and we have that. And some of these things they were also visionary, but some others, in my view, not so much. Some paintings by Picasso, like Guernica, I really like. But for example, if you tell me the Meninas, the series of paintings about the Velázquez Meninas that he did, for me, they don't say anything.
The paintings of Velázquez or Picasso?
Picasso's paintings of Velázquez Meninas.
Picasso's paintings of Velázquez, okay.
Yeah, which are a
I'm
series.
not into Picasso also, so let's say it, yeah.
Okay. And then, for example, we have Berthe, Edouard Berthe, and what is the name of this other guy? Using so much and now the name doesn't call. Well, let's go. Yeah, here. Probably they are here. Doesn't matter. Oh, here. Sorel and Berthe. They were also political theorists. But what I am interested in is their theory of art, because they really criticize the degeneration of art, that at some point European art goes into a race for innovation. And then whatever innovates is really appreciated, even if it's something totally stupid and uninteresting. And then that is the degeneration of art, as they call it. And they have also a degenerative theory of human evolution. So even though they were leftist, they are total critics of Marxism, because Marxism is a modern view of progress. Yeah, communism would be the end of progress, and well, we don't have time to get into that, and this is not about political theory or philosophy of history related to society, but in any case, they were very much critics of this Marxist view, and they write in the profusion of science emitted by a the declining society, how to recognize the signs of the new, if the modern is nothing but the last manifestation of the old in ways of dissolution. Yeah, and they say many other things. Yeah, like we have no time to. But anyhow, Jean Sorel, Edouard Berthe, and to some extent Walter Benjamin and Theodor Adorno, they also shared a little bit of that, even though Adorno and Benjamin were Marxists. But they got this influence, a little bit of these people there. Well, so this is a little bit what I would have to say about European art. But now, what about, one more thing, yeah. In the 20th century, then we have also a very interesting rebirth of what I would call primordial art, yeah, the art of primordial aesthetics, which is a combination, I forgot to say this. We have visionary art. Visionary art is the one that induces the aesthetic epoche, but it doesn't necessarily involve the indivisibility of connotation and denotation, and doesn't have a religious or mystical meaning. And that, what I would call primordial art or sacred art also, is the one where all these things coincide. It induces the epoche, the aesthetic epoche, so it is visionary art, but it also involves this indivisibility of denotation and connotation, and it has this sacred meaning. And all of those things converge, and that I call sacred or primordial art. I have forgotten to say that. And then in the late 20th century, in cinema, which is quite strange, we have some movies in which we appreciate that. And there is particularly a movie called Baraka, yeah, by this guy, Fritz, his name is.
Well, it's rather easy to find because there isn't this like a documentary, so it's the only sort of documentary because it's not a documentary, so it's like easy to find. It has an eclipse as a symbol for who wants to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sun eclipse, and it's a
yes, yes.
Which is a universal word, pretty much. It's well chosen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Baraka is a Sufi word.
Yeah, but it appears also in Hebrew and in other, let's say, Semitic languages, even towards Europe, with almost the same meaning. So
yes.
It's a very well chosen word.
Because actually, the Hebrew mystical tradition and the Muslim mystical tradition are the same tradition, which is pre-Muslim actually. It's not Muslim, but well, let's leave that aside. There we have the same philosophy of history, because they show primal people, and you see that something is wow. It relates to this. You get this wonder and this. You get awestruck. That's the word I was looking for before. Yeah, you get awestruck, and it's not beauty in the Kantian or Cartesian sense, but it's beauty in this Plato sense, very intensely, yeah. And then they begin to show also cities, and then all the cars passing, and there is this woman in the Tokyo metro, in the Tokyo underground, with this expression of total it's not like Munch shout, how you call it?
Yeah.
But not exactly, it's a different thing, but it's really
Disturbing.
yeah, exactly. And then all these factories of chicken, when they, and so everything that has to do with modernity is very fast, and everything that has to do with primal is very slow and very beautiful, and the modern is ugly. So it's really a masterpiece. It has a philosophy of history, and denotation and connotation coincide, and it's a re-evaluation of the sacred, and it has a sacred message. I think it's really like perhaps the great masterpiece of the 20th century, of 20th century art, if that could be possible, yeah, the so-called seventh art. And it has to do with the mandala. We are going to see when we see Eastern art. I have been, well, but I see that there is interest, because you have suggested that I question people, but I didn't feel the necessity, because I think it's doing it. So, okay. So, Baraka. Ron Fricke is his name, yeah, the director. Yeah. Okay, so now we speak a little bit about Asia. India and Greece in the very ancient times, before the Indo-European invasion of Greece and the Indo-European invasion of Persia and India, the proportions in statues seem to have been more or less the same. And those proportions were the proportions of a yogi. They weren't the proportions of an athlete or a warrior. They were the proportions more like of a yogi. For example, this, the ankle, this is an ankle?
No.
How do you call this?
Hips.
Huh?
Hips.
The side,
Hips.
what?
Hips.
Hips, and the
Ribs.
were more or less the same size. Whereas after the Indo-European invasion, the model was very big upward and very thin downward for the men, yeah? The woman, of course, not. But for the men, it was like that. So the whole of the ideal of the proportion of the morphology changed. So morphology was the same, and then it began to change as the Greek became more of warrior, and the Indians remained more mystics to some extent, yeah? Of course there were also warriors, but to a far lesser extent. The Persians also became very strong warriors, like the Greeks. And then in this archaic art, it was this similarity. Then there was this change. And then when Alexander the Great conquered India, then the artists that they brought with them, they developed and they brought Hellenistic art. But what was Hellenistic art? Actually, Hellenistic art was the revival of the morphology that existed before the Indo-European invasion, with the adornments proper of Greek art and proper of the Greek art of this Hellenistic period. So there was, like, when they came there, then we have the letter to King Melinda by Nagarjuna, that was a Greek king. So these Greek kings got this influence. And actually Alexander went to India because Anaxarchus of Abdera, emperor of Elis, convinced him to go to search the origins of Dionysius the Dark, who, according to Alain Danielou, was Shiva, was none other than Shiva. So that's why Alexander went there. And the Greek became Buddhist when they came there, and that the art of Gandhara was very much of a Greek Hellenistic, but with the Indian content, religious content, spiritual content, and the ancient morphology. So, and that also had some preciousness. I mean, we see that art, and also it has these sights and these gazings and many things which are also very, very striking. Then, in particular, in China, one of the most striking arts is painting, this typical Chinese painting done with Chinese ink on paper or silk. Yeah? In particular, the art that was connected to the Taoist and Zen or Chan schools, which was this one that was done with sometimes in black and white, sometimes in color, and particularly the Southern school, which was the school that was related to the Southern school of Zen, which was the school of Huineng or Weilang in his language, was the one that acquired or developed or had the greatest achievement in art. And in this art, sometimes the center of the painting can be nothingness. And maybe some mountains appear like they fuse in the fog, in the brooms, and they are suggested here and there, and maybe the center is just emptiness. And then one of the greatest theorists of the Southern school said, for example, the mountain should be 10 times as big as the pine tree. The pine tree should be 10 times as big as the horse. The horse should be 10 times as big as the human being. So the human being was never represented, yeah, sometimes. Like the pictures of Bodhidharma, for example, yeah, but that's more like expressionistic. If we could borrow a Western expression and put it to a civilization and a time that had nothing to do with it, whereas this landscape painting was more like impressionistic, if we could do the same. The human being is represented as part of nature, never as this main subject as it is in Western art. And when it is, it's because they want to show the qualities of enlightenment, yeah, in the eyes and in the expression. So it has absolutely nothing to do with Western art, and it's actually visionary also. And it has this indivisibility of connotation and denotation because it leads you into a state which is the state that it illustrates, and it takes you into it. So it's really a sacred or primordial art in the sense I was using before. And then what about Tibetan Tanka painting? Wow. For me, this is one of the most incredible types of art that has ever been produced, if we could speak of production in this case. I already explained this, I already told this story about my experience at this museum in Bhaktapur. I don't know if it survived this late earthquake. Maybe it was all destroyed, maybe it's still there, I have no idea. In any case, a mandala is something very interesting, yeah? The center represents the state, the awakened state, the state of Rigpa. The periphery represents the ordinary condition of deluded human beings. And there is a middle section, a middle zone, and in this middle zone there is a circle of fire. And this circle of fire, why fire? because fire frightens us. And sometimes there are 4 fierce guardians of the 4 gates, and they represent also the fear that the condition of the center, that the awake condition, inspires in the people who live in the periphery, because if derealization is madness, if the death of the ego is death, yeah, but it's plenitude and perfection. But we don't know that. We just see that it's death, it's madness, it's derealization, it's the loss of reality, it's something frightening, really frightening. So when we are in the ordinary condition, this middle zone is that which forestalls us from going into the center. It scares us away from the center. But once we go to the center for the first time, or when we are going into the center, maybe like in this Zen, yeah, the mountains were no longer mountains, the rivers were no longer rivers, that's frightening. Then we were in the guardian zone, in the zone of fire. Also in Sufism, there is Maruf Karki, a Sufi master, had a dream that, some Sufi guy had a dream that Maruf Karki was in hell. Maruf Karki was a big Sufi mystic, and he was in hell, he was surrounded by flames. And then he went to Ibn al-Arabi, who was from Murcia in Spain, in that time where the Hebrew and the Arabs were the same thing. Yeah?
Amazing merging of the 3 mystic traditions there.
Exactly. Exactly. And he said, wow, if Maruf is in hell, then Sufi must be something terrible. I want to quit. And then Ibn al-Arabi said, no, the fire doesn't mean that Maruf is in hell. It represents that which you have to go through to attain the state of Maruf. And that is the mandala principle, yeah? So, after we are in that, when we really come into the center, then the guardians are that which help us stay in the center. When we are in Rigpa, and we tend to go out of Rigpa, something happens, and if we have a good capacity of spontaneous liberation, this will remind us to look at the mind and go back into the center. And as we go through this more and more and more, some spontaneous mechanism becomes established, particularly if we practice something like Togel in Dzogchen, where as soon as we begin to go out from the center, the guardian pushes us back into the center. And then we exhaust samsara very rapidly and get there. So the mandala represents a condition of awakening, and it illustrates, it's didactic also. In the West we think didactic art is very bad. Yeah? Here is didactic. Didactic or didactic? I don't know how to pronounce this
In
word.
Romanian it's didactic for sure.
Didactic, I don't know, yeah? So it's teaching us something, but at the same time it's giving us a glimpse of that condition, yeah? To which it is pointing. And at the same time, yeah, and then when you stand in front of it, poof, and you tend to get in that condition on, so the indivisibility of denotation and connotation is like one of the best examples of that. And it's sacred because it takes us to this sacred state. So I think this is one of the greatest examples of sacred primordial art. And so I think I have said much of what I have to say. It was programmed until 10 o'clock. So now we can have questions, you can speak, and but maybe we
Maybe
can,
a little break.
Maybe just what I was going to suggest, a little break before, and then we can come with the questions and answers, or your comments, or objections or whatever comes from you.
Accusations.
Accusations, yeah. So we can stop that for a minute. E-camera.
Oh.
So actually, that's what knowledge is.
Mm-hmm.
Eating of the tree of knowledge is falling into dualism because then you have the three types, second and third type of ability, subject and
Yeah,
object, then
exactly.
good and bad, up and down, and left and right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so if you like,
I did.
do this. Okay, so whoever wants to say something, we are all ears and mouth.
Do you think that Aboriginal art is
The
something?
what?
Aboriginal art with the poems and the dot and
You mean Australian?
Australian Aboriginal art.
Totally sacred.
Yes.
Would it be the same
Yes. And this thing that they play,
the didgeridoo?
yeah, it's actually really, well, maybe Alex could tell more about that than me.
No, please.
Huh?
Let me see what you know
No, you go.
about the didgeridoo.
Yeah. But loud so that they can
Yeah.
hear also.
Well, I only know it's traditionally only men are allowed to play it, and I don't know the symbolism so much. I know how only how the true didgeridoos are made. You know, they go through the desert and they have this kind of intuitive vision to find this piece of wood, eucalypt, or which is eaten away through the middle by the termites, and they just take that and maybe work a little bit on it, and the instrument is already made. They found it in nature, but and these low vibrations, maybe they think it's connecting them with the planet Earth and this kind of stuff, but I don't know more about this.
Yeah, but it's very visionary because those low vibrations are very similar to this low vibration that in throat singing,
The Tuvan and the Mongolian, yeah.
yeah,
Totally.
Tibetan, Mongolian, Bhutanese also, which Alex does, yeah, even though maybe he doesn't know all the letters and all the lyrics. Well, lyrics is a weird word, yeah.
Yeah. And I know also this Australians, they in their mythology, everything is a dream. So they have the dream of rain, the dream of that bird, the dream of the snake. All these phenomena are considered dreams, each one with its specific qualities and this kind of.
Yeah.
So also very interesting.
So that is a Buddhist parable, yeah. I mean, reality is like a dream, and they call about the dream of this, the dream of that, the dream of that other thing. So it's definitely primordial art, definitely. Not only the painting, but the music and everything, yeah.
It would be interesting to connect maybe the idea of dream time, because they have like this mythological dream time. And they say creation, like this creation, it's like a temporary, statical dream that eventually like a soap bubble or something will melt back into the dream time. So the original time is the dream time for them.
Yeah.
So the ancient beings emerged from the dream time and they created this world. It's quite amazing actually.
Yes. Also, their costumes in many other ways are also very interesting. Even their relation to sexuality, erotism, and so on is
Yeah.
without these Western taboos. And,
Yeah, but do you know the story of the didgeridoo, how it appeared? Or I don't know the didgeridoo. There's this another instrument that's like doing the same thing. I don't know. I know a story from their tradition that like a woman was chopping wood in the forest, and a piece of wood fly to the air and made this weird sound, and she made it the first instrument. And when she came to her man and showed the instrument, he said, "Oh, that's a magical thing. You are not allowed ever to do that." And he took it. And they have this at Uluru. No woman is allowed. So they have like a weird, how to say, taboo for women. So they're not allowed to touch some instruments and to go on the mountain, on the top of Uluru, which is the primeval mountain. So they also have some.
There is some sexism.
Yeah, there is some sexism involved there too. Yeah. Weird
Which
enough.
wasn't in the primordial age. And that is precisely why André Le Roy-Gourhan and Negle Marin-Pereire and Theodore Rosac, they all said that what nowadays we call primal peoples are not at all the same as the really primal peoples at the...
I'm totally sure that they're not, because they discovered the Neanderthals were like very busy doing art. So like they were like very visionary, so they were like eating in the day, but they had like in the nighttime like a sort of trance moment, and they were doing chanting. They had some weird religious life connected with the animal spirits maybe. They were doing all those paintings in the caves, so it's like, it's beyond our, let's say, modern understanding. But now we're coming easily to understand that they were like not just ooga ooga crazy monkeys chasing the meat around the forest. Definitely not.
Like also before, it was thought that the Homo sapiens killed the Neanderthals out of existence, and it's not true.
Not true, yeah.
Now it's been shown not to be true.
Yeah.
I was asking myself when you spoke about the mandala, when you saw the pictures with the fire and the sensation you had, if not knowing anything about mandala could trigger, yes, this sensation of amazing or primary art, primordial.
Well, I knew I had read quite a bit about Zen Buddhism, and I had some experiences of oneness and so on that probably were not Rigpa, probably were like Kunji and Arupa Lokas and so on. But I already had some framework. But what happened, I don't know whether it was connected to that framework. Probably something that happened spontaneously, having nothing to do with understanding what the mandala is. So the experience just happened to me, but now after I understood what the mandala is and so on, I can relate that to this indivisibility of connotation and denotation and all that I said before in the lecture.
And when you are staying again now, knowing everything you are knowing about this, do you have the same sensation or it's quite different?
Well, I have in those particular mandalas I haven't been again since that time. I never went back. But for example, in Prado I was a few years ago. Through all of these, when I was a child already, I was awestruck, yeah. But now that after I came back from the East, after having practiced a lot and so on, I had the same experience, but much more clear, much clearer. So I imagine that if I went back to those mandalas, which I don't know whether they are still extant or they disappeared, probably, maybe the experience might be even stronger. I don't know.
So you never met someone telling you the same kind of experience without knowing anything before about this?
No.
No.
No. But I never spoke about anyone who had been at that museum in Bhaktapur about this, all what I was speaking about today. Yes.
I've been in Bhaktapur, but I don't remember if I visited the museum or this museum.
It's in one of these, maybe the main square of Bhaktapur. It was
Yeah.
on the northern side. That I remember, it was 1973 when I was there. But up till there, my memory of it, yeah.
I was in Bhaktapur, I don't know, 7 years ago, and I cannot remember nothing. It's a temple, very nice temple with wooden gates.
I think it depends on the time you spend visiting it. If you are
Half of
just
the-
touring,
half of the day in Bataclan.
yeah,
No.
it's not. I don't think
Not
it's
too much,
enough.
yes.
Yes. It's the same for me.
My hypothesis is that this
One
is like an art created with a certain awareness, even with a certain technique. And I rely on my own experience with that and my own knowledge. Because in Christian Eastern iconography, you have the icon of Jesus or Mary. It's created from darkness towards the light. It's always like that painted. So it's not just like modern painting.
Yes.
So you have like, it's a rite actually. It's a ritual, very complex ritual. That's one thing. And another thing, I had an experience, a direct and like your experience maybe, I don't know, staring at the eyes of Buddha. It was like a statue of Buddha from. It was, I think, a Chinese statue of Buddha, and he had the eyes, and at first glance you say, yeah, this funny Buddha is like, he's staring at me. And when you were like fixing his eyes somewhere in between and staying for a few seconds, something happened, I don't know. But it was like really, really weird, like really, like an invisible hand grabbing you to the present moment, like fixing you there, and it's crazy. So I said, okay, that cannot be, accident. I mean, they made this statue in order to induce you a sort of meditation state. And I think Buddha, all over Buddha in Buddhism is like that, because they don't relate to it like we relate to a Christian icon, so they don't really pray to Buddha. So it's like, you are Buddha actually, so it's like an example of how this grace flows.
Yes.
So this is my hypothesis.
For sure.
It's no accident actually, the way they are made.
No, for sure. I think even like there are termas which are statues, and termas which are works of art of different types. And why are they termas? Because they have the power to induce something which is very relevant for the spiritual path, for the Buddhist path.
Yeah.
Can you make visionary art unintentionally?
Yes.
Without intention?
Yes, I'm sure, but then it will be visionary art, but it might not be, or it might be sacred and primordial art in the sense I was explaining. Yeah.
That's exactly the answer.
And also, like, for example, I was in Göteborg. Just before I went to India, I went to work in Göteborg because one could work for 3 months with an international student card. And I went there to make with my wife and my child, and we worked, both she and I, had 2 jobs each, and we made some money. And once we went into the forest with a group of friends who had invited us there, and there was this girl called Mari, and when she was painting, it was incredible because she was not moving the brush. The brush was moving. I mean, you could see that it was not like, but I mean, her hand was being taken by some power that was not hers. It was like this Wu Wei, or Wei Wu Wei, of which the Taoist and the Zen Buddhist speak. And there are several words in Epoché also for that. Yeah, action through non-action. And then I told her, you know why you paint so good? Because it's not you who paint. But I made a mistake by saying that. Because then she said, possession? Schizophrenia? Schizophrenia? And I could not say anything because it was like, if I try to justify, it's going to be worse. Yeah, because I am trying to like I am afraid of giving her this impression, and I just remain silent. If you try to take fear out of someone, you confirm his idea that there is something frightful.
Yeah.
That's what when they say when somebody has this kind of crazy crisis, no, like going mad, you should just talk normally to the person, not like, oh please,
Of course.
just normally, because
Yes.
otherwise everything
That's
becomes-
a very psychiatrical thing, you know. They even teach that sometimes, you know. Yeah, with
Yeah, that depends on what type of psychiatry.
of course what's good. Actually, Roland Lenk, as you mentioned him, he was let's say anti-psychiatrist, but actually the anti-psychiatry movement was started by psychiatrists who were studying
Of course.
madness in other countries, so some sort of anthropology, not psychiatrist. And Roland said you need to be almost like a shaman, and a shaman understands that that person lives in a certain world or state, and how can you speak with it unless you are in the same state of world, because you know,
Exactly.
otherwise it's like another language you will not
Yes.
understand.
Yes.
And he even did that. I mean, he did this amazing case of this young woman. She was like sitting naked and being in a trance, like, you know. We have some metro kids that they are doing the same, like weird trance. And she was like not speaking with anybody anymore, and they isolated her in a room. They thought her to be a little dangerous maybe, so they took her in a special soft walls room, you know. And Lang entered there, and he just, you know, got naked himself too. So he entered like naked, he put his, and everybody was like, what the fuck is doing? And he was like staying there for like a few hours and doing the same things and just staying there. And at one point she spoke, and she never spoke like for weeks with anybody. So
Exactly. Yeah. Also, he said that, for example, he had read or heard like what many people had said about some patients, yeah, that they exhibited this or that type of behavior, but when he was with them, with those patients, they didn't behave in that way at all.
yeah,
Why? Because he was not reacting with
Of course.
fear or with projection that maybe even read at the paraverbal level.
of course. And he never said or thought they're not normal.
Exactly.
They're just normal.
Exactly.
Because that's the whole point,
Exactly.
actually.
So he never saw symptoms.
Yeah, exactly.
I was curious also about when you said at point you were seeing mountains like mountains, block of rocks. I don't know how you were seeing them. And at another point you were seeing them as another way. In which way can you explain the differences you felt between the before and the after?
Yeah. What happens is, normally, yeah, when we perceive something, there are several stages which pass so quickly that we don't realize. The first is that there is this ignorance of the true condition, like, and then immediately the duality of subject and object arises. And you perceive an infinity as object, and then that is because of a concept. This is the most subtle of concepts, which is called Trimandala in Sanskrit or Korsum in Tibetan. And I translate that as threefold directional thought structure, yeah, which possesses a subject, an object, and something in between, which may be experience, action, thinking, etc. Then we take something as figure, and because we learn that the dog is a dog, when we were very little, mother said, dog, yeah? And then we saw the dog and we recognized this dynamic pattern that moves in a certain way, has certain characteristic, and wow, yeah? And then I learned that that is a dog, and then I learned what a cat is. So it's related to a word, but after I don't need the word. Whenever I see a dog or a cat, I perceive them as a dog or a cat. Yeah, because this is a type of, it's what René Descartes and also Locke in Anglo-Saxon philosophy called an intuitive thought, which doesn't sound in the mind. It's not the same as discursive thoughts. So I see it and I know it's a dog. So first I see it as something external, and the whole of the sensory manifestation, and then immediately I single out something and I understand it in terms of a concept. But then I think that is in itself the concept, and that it is in itself separate. And it's not separate, it was my perception that singled it out in this continuum. And even according to contemporary physics, the universe, field theory, is a continuum of energy. Nothing is separate.
Okay, this is theoretical.
Yeah.
But when you are in front of the mountain,
Exactly.
how do you see? How do you perceive it?
Okay.
I understand the theoretical
Yes.
way, but when you see it, you
When
see
you are-
something maybe different or
When
not?
you are in the normal condition, in the ordinary condition, then okay, when you are in the ordinary condition, you perceive in terms of this mental image that you developed when mother said mountain, or whoever said mountain or river or this or that, and you created that mental image. And then you understand that in itself that then when you no longer, when somehow, because you get a wider panoramic, a more panoramic way of, let's not say perception, but experience, a more panoramic experience, and there is more intensity, and the concepts take longer in coming into the experience, or they no longer come because you are practicing and you have too much energy, and that doesn't allow the concept to go in, then you are just lost. You see the mountain and you don't know where it is, and you see the river and you don't know where it is, and you get frightened. And this is very much like what Lang was talking about also, and many other, Bateson, and well, there is a very long list of, you can find a long list in my book, these 4 volumes that we talked about before. And then when you are no longer in that middle state, but when you become acquainted with emptiness, and you have real ripa, not only an experience of emptiness, then you no longer you are no longer surprised by that, or frightened by that, and or puzzled by that, and then you perceive this pattern for what it is, and you know that this is called mountain, and you know it corresponds to the concept of mountain, but you no longer perceive it through the filter of that concept. So you can deal with it as a mountain, but you are not deceived by the concept of a mountain. You don't confuse the map with the territory.
Okay.
To express it in the terms of Korsivsky, the semantic man, who spoke about map as the conceptual and territory as the sensory. So you are not confusing them, and then you are seeing things as they are. And you know this is called a mountain, but you don't perceive it through that colored and pre-structured lens. Yeah, it's like a lens that has something, some shape and some colors and so on, that make you perceive things that way. I mean, it's not exactly like that, but it's an example that examples are never perfect.
There is an interesting experience they did, and I think it correlates with that somehow, about how powerful our, let's say, it's called in a way because it's not direct perception actually, it's this filter perception, it's a word for it. It is. They made like a test drive, you know, for drivers in USA, and they created like some new, similar with the existing ones, signs. And under very stressful situations, they would see it as one of those signs. They would never see that it's doodle or it's wrong. The brain would say, oh, okay, it's that sign. No? So this is how powerful our brains are. We do not see what is there because of the concept. So we say, Exactly, it's just a mountain, but with that, so it's a quality of perception. So that's why probably going towards that Rigpa state is like you lose all that, let's say, fake mindfulness of perception, and then you add to a quality of perception that cannot be named. So, and now you can use the language like the others do, but you see more. You see. Actually, seeing is it's also a trap, because in Western world, it's, what do you see? How do you see? You see, you see, you see. You do not really see. I mean, you could see, but it's not something visual. It's not something you can reproduce. So it's just a quality that cannot be named. The quality of perception.
When you explain it even to yourself, you're losing it. Because
Yeah, almost like
the
that.
description is never complete. The description is never
Yeah, the
experienced.
word too weak to explain what you are feeling.
And not only the word, this concept, the intuitive concept doesn't correspond either.
Yeah.
And also, like, it gets emotional. Like, when I was a child, I heard a sound and it was frightful to me. Then whenever I will hear that sound, it will have some connotation in my experience, and it will bring about a certain shadow of experience, of emotion. And then I see a person, and I see something, and I perceive that person as evil or as good according to some previous experience and so on.
Exactly.
So how about this? Many people, I think they make an equivalent between enlightenment and this pure perception with being just like a child. But some say it's a bit different. I think it has something to do with these filters, but it's not clear to me how.
Yes. There are two examples. One of them, well, I mean, I know two examples. One of them is in the Chuang-Tzu. It says that mental health is being like a child who goes and doesn't know that he's going, stops and doesn't know that he's stopping. And then he says that this condition where you are not aware of limits and so on they compare that with enlightenment or something, yeah? And there is also in the Dzogchen teaching, they compare with a child who goes to a temple with Tibetan frescoes, which are like tankas, in the walls, and sees everything very bright, like this hue, intensity of hue, and it's like that, yeah, and they say that there is some similarity. But of course, the child cannot manage the world. Only after he has learned to manage the whole of the world, and then he recovers that quality, but still has the capacity that he developed through. So enlightenment is not the same, because it's not going back, it's going forward. You recover that quality, but with all the qualities that develop, the positive ones that allow you to manage the world, but without the drawbacks. For example, there is this famous Anglo-Saxon poem. The centipede was happy quite until the toad, for fun, asked him, "Pray, which leg goes after which?" Which brought his mind to such a pitch that he fell into a ditch while thinking how to run.
Wow, so, yeah.
And we are always like that. I mean, we have this self-hindrance, self-encumbering, produced by dualistic self-consciousness. And that a Buddha instead could be compared. In the Chuang-Tzu, there is an example. Chui, the artisan, could draw circles by hand better than with the compass. Why? Because his faculties were integrated, and thus he suffered no impediment. So, dualistic self-consciousness always creates troubles. That's why we have the condition of Dzogchen. Dzogpa means full, like a glass with full, which is full, is plenitude. But Dzogpa also means, for example, Nadia Comaneci, we are here in Romania, she did twice in the Olympic Games, 10-10-10. Yeah? Not all her life she did like that because she was not enlightened. Yeah, but she did that. That was perfect. And stokpa also means perfection. For example, you could say those two times Nadia Comaneci did a perfect performance. So Stokchen means total plenitude because you don't feel separate from the whole, so you are total plenitude, and total perfection because you suffer no impediment. So all the learning you did throughout your life, all this learning is incorporated but without the hindering self-consciousness, the encumbering self-consciousness, without centipede effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jung had this expression of ancient child or wise child. So you're like a child, but you're a wise child.
Yeah.
Ancient child.
Exactly.
Do you think that animals are enlightened in a certain way?
No, they have very strong, the first type of awareness, that's already said, first type of unawareness, the Marikpa 1, which is the ignorance of our true condition due to a factor of stupefaction. Actually, ignorance is represented by a pig. A pig goes directly to what he has to eat, and he doesn't see anything but that, and he eats it. And he eats very caviar or shit, it doesn't matter. Yeah, he goes there and eats it.
We are ignorant because we make a distinction between caviar and shit.
Yes, but we are not the same as a pig, because the pig, I mean, is just goes there because something is leading him there with total ignorance.
But there are some animals that, like Buddha statues, they inspire you something
Yes,
and
yes,
really calm and
yes.
harmonic, I don't know. Beautiful.
Like at the beginning of Baraka, those monkeys
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
exactly. They
in
were,
the
like, very
in
interesting.
the hot springs,
Mhm.
in the snow at the top of the mountain, yeah. And also Baraka uses animals to inspire that, because animals are more primal. Their avidya is not so developed as ours, so it looks as far more wholesome, and actually it's more wholesome.
Mhm.
But they have this first type of avidya, and they also have the other two types, but very, very undeveloped. I mean, they have it very. They distinguish the teeth of the mother from all else, and they go to that, and they don't go to something else. So they already have this preconcept, even inborn, and they eat certain kinds of foods and others they don't, but they are not enlightened. I mean, because they cannot get enlightened because they don't have.
So the lack of conceptualization is not enough for
Sorry?
enlightenment. Conceptualization is just an
On what?
abstraction. It's just an
But what word you use?
the lack of conceptualization
No, but they have conceptualization.
in a primal form. But
Yeah, it's a very underdeveloped type of
So
conceptualization.
in your opinion, no conceptualization whatsoever is similar with or equal with enlightenment, or there are some other abstractions? Ignorance, basically, nature of ignorance is abstraction, or it's something more than this?
If a stone has no awareness,
Questions or
let's imagine that this is very discussable. For example, Gregory Bateson spoke of mind being through all of matter, and David Cooper, who was associated with Lang, he spoke of molecular units of awareness.
Wow.
But let's not talk about that, yeah? Let's talk about awareness as we human beings have. If something doesn't have awareness, in the sense in which we understand the world normally, it cannot become enlightened.
I would dare to say in a way you could, but only by a play of words, say that they are enlightened, but it's without the quality of enlightenment.
Exactly.
Because when I look at my cat, she's definitely Zen, but I don't think she is really Zen,
Yeah.
because lacking of that quality. So, yeah.
And I have
How
a
do we
she
know
cat.
this?
Huh?
How do we know what's happening inside the animal?
We don't know, but there is in the Chuanzi, there is a very interesting story. Chuanzi said, the fish are really happy because he was throwing something, I think it was because he was throwing some food, and he said the fish are very happy. And then the guy who was with him said, how do you know that they are happy? If you are not inside the fish and your mind, your framework is totally different from the fish. And then he said, the fish are very happy.
So we don't have any explanation, we just believe this is like this.
No, it's not that you believe. If someone is enlightened, then he has a certain kind of empathy with all beings that allow them to
see that.
To realize that, yeah, to share that.
Still, I see a difference between the domestic animals, domesticated, and the wild ones. It's pretty like the pig doesn't really represent the spirit of the animal. It's not, I don't see. Actually, because if you see a wild animal, it has a wider instinct than I want to eat. It decides what to eat. Like the wolves eat the wounded deers. They have, though, a bigger an unawareness, let's say. They don't eat, oh, I see this deer, it's the first one I see, I will eat it. No. They go for the wounded, they go, I don't know, I think they're connected with the source somehow.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
definitely
but
connected with the source,
still
no doubt about it.
that's an intuitive conceptualization. I mean, that's a very underdeveloped, I mean, with regard to ours, I mean, a very how you say, not so sophisticated, not so detailed, not so precise, no, that's not the word, not so complicated conceptualization, more intuitive, and they know much better. We can get poison with food, and animals also, yeah, but when with poison that are not natural. Yeah, if a human being puts poison in the food of a cat, probably the cat will eat it, but the cat will never eat pork which is rotten, and a human being will. But that's conceptualization. Just very, very natural, inborn, but it's some type of conceptualization.
Because I'm thinking also about, I'm a big fan of animation. And
Animation?
Animations. And there is a studio, if you know Ghibli Studio.
Which studio?
Ghibli Studio.
Japanese.
It's Japanese,
Oh,
they are
okay.
making animation.
Miyazaki.
And they have a lot of mythological symbolics, wise stuff there. And it's an animation with a girl, Mononoke princess, that is meeting the forest spirit. And it's also the link with the virgin forest, you know, it's a big ecosystem where everything lives harmoniously, from ants to plants to everything. And then when you go there, it's not like the Norway forest where they cut it and let it grow. It's very old, it touches the ancient spirit. But it's a point where nature touches something that's also inside us, that it's also, because we are also nature, we are also animals.
Of course.
I don't know, maybe there is a point where animals in nature touch the primordial state. But we humans are getting, I don't know how to say, getting not closer, but further.
Yeah, the Stoics, they used to compare animals, and also the Cynics, they used to call themselves, Cynics means God, dog. Yeah, so they compare themselves to dogs. And the Stoics compare with animals the primordial condition somehow. But I think there is a difference because there is already, it's like in evolution, the degenerative evolution, yeah, animals have avidya, but much less than us. But to that same extent, they have less capacity to become enlightened. And that's why in Buddhism we speak about enlightenment being possible only in the human condition. So if you see an animal, it looks like a cat, for example, or any feline.
Yeah, any feline.
Yeah, they walk in a way and so perfect. They don't disturb anything. They go through everything, but it's not enlightenment. I mean, the way I see it. Yeah.
But why do we see, for example, the grace of an animal? It struck us
Exactly.
perfection. But also, when we depict the enlightenment quality in human beings, we also look for this perfection in calligraphy or in other arts, sword fight, or I don't know, martial arts. The same perfection of movement, let's say natural movement, as animals, but we see it in humans like proof of enlightenment, but in animals we
Of
don't.
course, because animals, they don't have this centipede effect.
Sorry, I don't know the...
They don't
The
have the
centipede
range.
was happy
What's
quiet.
the first one?
Remember the poem? The centipede was happy quiet
Yes,
until
yes.
it
I
yeah?
didn't get that. I couldn't understand
It's
that.
old English, it's hard to understand.
It
Okay.
was a
Is
limerick
Muriel
I
Carvalho,
lost.
may I say it in Romanian to him?
Yeah, please.
I think I know it. If it's
Okay,
a
what's the-
limerick about the centipede,
Okay.
he was
Yeah.
asked how he can walk.
It was a bit, no?
So animals don't have the centipede effect. So actually the centipede cannot have the centipede effect. It's us who can have the centipede effect.
And may I say, we project a quality toward the cats. I mean, her perfection is not like we think it is, so to speak. It's generated by evolution, basically. And if you put her in a very new and stressful situation, she won't be that graceful no more. And trust me, I had cats all my life, and when I was a kid, I was a weird scientist bastard. So I was doing all kind of weird stuff to cats. So I know.
We're recording that.
Yeah. Whatever. So I know that for a fact. So if she's in a new situation, she would still be based on her patterns to react. And if her patterns fail her, so there you go. So of course you have like in Shaolin monks, they had all these fighting styles, and they were like the tiger and the mantis style. But it's what inspires us, you know. And animals always will inspire us, always. But do we know the fish is wise and he knows everything? That's poetical, but talking about the happy fish, we don't know if the fish knows everything, and he doesn't want to tell us, that's for sure. So, yeah.
And for example, we have this centipede effect, us, because we have this conceptual mind very developed, and then it interferes with our spontaneity. Yeah, we tend to objectify ourselves as objects, yeah, or objectify, and then when that interferes with our subjectivity, with our spontaneity. The subjective, you cannot be subject and object at the same time. So you have this doubt. But the animals never go through that because they don't have this self-consciousness. A little bit a dog, for example, yeah, can have it. Even in Venezuela, when a dog is cheating, they say if you go like that or like that, I don't remember, it will be stopped. And children do it and it stops and it cannot go on. Because they already have some self-consciousness because they are domestic animals. But other animals which are not domestic, they don't have that. Yeah? Then, of course, they look very wholesome and very harmonious and so on. But because they haven't developed this self-consciousness, that once we have it, when we go beyond it, then in art we do the perfect circle and all of this. And then that's the quality of enlightenment. Why? Because we were the opposite before. And then, but the cat was never like that. He was always good until you put him in that situation.
Of course. And then she becomes better even with that situation because they adapt, you know.
Exactly.
That's the law.
Exactly.
What do you think about dolphins? Because I understand they are able to be aware about themselves. So they have the consciousness about their existence.
Yeah, they have a cerebral cortex.
They recognize themselves in a mirror, which is quite amazing.
Yeah.
There are like just a few animals recognizing themselves in the mirror.
But they are not always good. They go to ride other groups and they sodomize the male of that group and they have bad habits. So not everything is pure and
But you
nature.
call them bad, you know. I remind you.
Yes.
They're just habits or whatever. But I mean,
Yeah, I was not.
is a lion eating
But,
a beautiful impala a bad lion? I don't think it's just a hungry lion. And
No,
it
but
doesn't
they
tell you.
dominate and they are aggressive. They even kill each other with.
They save humans from sharks. I don't know. Yeah,
They do a lot of nice things too, so he just takes the side that he likes and not dolphins. They do a lot of...
There is a gradient of.
Of course, it's always like that. It's always like that.
But anyhow, they have a quite elaborate language. Yeah, the amount of sounds they make are amazing.
Mhm.
I understand they have a brain more performant than ours.
Yeah, in according to the criteria on the basis of which they have studied them. Yeah,
Mhm.
but we don't know. I don't have to become a dolphin to tell you. I want to speak, so
And not forget the human language, so that's a challenge already.
the what?
Not forget to speak a human language also, so it's a challenge already.
Exactly. But if we were a transfer, maybe we could, like the newly fish were happy, yeah. In the same way, we could maybe.
And
It's-
how can we explain the Indian spirituality icons?
The what?
Indian spirituality icons like the elephant. I forgot the name of that deity.
Ganesh.
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 Okay.
And the other, like the cow is sacred and everything.
I think the same as what I said before, me, but okay, I
What?
won't say it again. I mean, in the same way maybe, who knows. But
That
I wanna
they
see your
just
answer.
inspire us. It's just like this. We are getting inspired by animals. That's it.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe they see the good qualities of a certain animal, and then they make it into an archetype of those good qualities. Of course, the story of Ganesh is that Shiva's son was killed, yeah, by the Rakshasas. I think it was Rakshasas who were, or the anti-gods, maybe the Asuras, I don't remember, who wanted to take over the realm of the gods, and then in order to save his child, he got an elephant. They got the head of an elephant and put it on the child, and it became Ganesh. But then we have Hanuman, yeah, who represents the people. Why? Probably it has to do with an Indo-European prejudice that saw the people who were in India before they came as being like monkeys or something like that.
But
So racist.
yeah, but let's not forget. Even if we can say it's an underlying racism, Hanuman is also very important.
Of course,
He's the best friend of Rama,
of
and
course.
he's almost like a guardian. He protects him. He also represents joyful playfulness of humans. So that's also a quality
Yes.
in a way. So
Yes.
so Hanuman has always a trick up his sleeve.
Yeah.
At least I know Hanuman is the archetype of a perfect disciple.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a very nice symbol.
Yeah. The people who are simple-minded are the perfect disciples. The people who are very complicated-minded
That's the beauty.
are not so.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Hanuman is like that. He's like
Yeah. So it's the people.
Yeah.
And,
But I would not. Now I realize there's something interesting in what Krina said, but it also has to do maybe with our experience of the sacred, because we talked about the Neanderthals, and their experience was mainly with animals. So who knows? I mean, a shaman can say, if you're careful enough, speaking about perception, you can distinguish between a spirit dog and a real dog. But can we do that, you know, let's say on a regular day-to-day basis? Maybe not. And maybe that's true with elephants and any other thing, because Indians were saying about the buffalo and the sacred spirit, the great spirit, coming into a buffalo at one time. So it's an interesting topic actually, but I think it's also human experience. Either way, I mean.
I think 10 o'clock now, and tomorrow we have a retreat, so we have to finish. So you can stop that.
Thank you, Elias.
Thank
you,
to all of
everybody.
you who participated so preciously, animatedly, and willingly, and